I wish I'd known these 15 things before I built my first custom activation. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear blueprint to avoid costly mistakes and deliver custom activations flawlessly every single time. Number 1, clarify your vision and scope early. Your vision is your North Star. Don't let vagueness derail it. When I first started, I jumped into a build without a precise brief. I lost time, money, and client trust because everybody had a different interpretation of what needed to be delivered. This is why I use my no surprises scope check to nail down all the details right from the start. Firstly, I go and get the exact measurements of the space. Then I'll work with the client to create the list of must-haves and key brand elements. From there, I write all this down so that everybody's on the exact same page. Some people might worry that too much detail stifles creativity, but clarity actually fuels creativity. One of the mistakes I've seen so many people make over the years is having a scope that isn't clearly written down. And this is when budgets and timelines begin to creep. So I always find it's better to lock the vision in early so that the custom builds can roll out flawlessly. Number 2, align budgets and expectations early. Don't let budget surprises wreck your vision. I learned this the hard way. Money matters from day one. Too many times I've seen quotes go out for briefs and they're double the budget. So before this, I like to run everything through my budget reality check framework. This allows me to make some good recommendations to clients so that we can steer the vision in the right direction before the design's gone too far and everybody's got to start reworking it. Firstly, we need to establish a really clear budget. If we can't do this, we at least need to agree on a budget range so that not everybody's going around in circles later on. This allows me to create some tiered options for the same design so that we can find what's best going to suit the money available to us. This then allows us to start setting everybody's expectations on what's going to be possible for the budget available. Some people might fear discussing money too soon, but transparency builds trust and speeds everything up. Without a budget, everyone's just treading water while the deadline is fast approaching. If you can align your creative vision with realistic numbers, you're going to save a lot of heartache. Number 3, collaborate with your builders from day one. Stop working solo, work with experts from day one. I wish I'd involved the builders earlier is something I hear all the time. I've seen too many marketing managers and producers trying to figure out all the construction details on their own, only to face massive reworks later on. A partner planning system involves the custom builders right from the concept stage. The first thing we do is set up an initial brainstorming session to talk through the concept. Then we give feedback on design and materials feasibility to make sure that what we're proposing is actually going to work. And then we rework the client's vision based on this input. Some worry this limits creativity, but collaboration sparks innovation. Waiting too long to involve your custom builder is when we see people redoing a heap of work because they were missing the technical guidance at the start. Your builders are your creative allies. Bring them in early. Number 4, lock down your timeline. Time wasted is money lost. Get your timeline right. Projects crumble due to delays. This is how I keep things in check. I've seen so many people not pay close enough attention to detailed timelines. And when this happens, costs can go up and quality can suffer. My timeline mastery approach locks in deadlines and milestones from day one. Firstly, I want to set realistic deadlines for each phase of the project. Then I'll confirm supply lead times and adjust accordingly. From there, I share the schedule with my team so that I know everybody's working to the same milestones. You might think the timelines are flexible, and in some circumstances they can be, but delays can cost you dearly. Too often, one missed milestone creates a domino effect, and it's really hard to wrangle back control. Sticking to your timeline will keep your project on track and your budget intact. Number 5, set clear decision deadlines. Every postponed decision adds up fast. Decision delays can cost you big. Set deadlines now. When we wait too long for decisions to be made, it just makes everybody's life harder. And this can have a really negative impact on the budget and quality. I use my decision deadline framework to assign strict deadlines to every decision. Firstly, I list out all the decisions that need to be made. From there, I assign a deadline to each of those decisions, which then allows us to follow up with the right person at the right time for when that decision needs to be made. You might worry that this sounds a little bit too rigid, but this is going to save a heap of chaos later on. I always want to try and have a level of flexibility in this, but having a structure like this in place allows us to see when we're missing the mark so that we can adjust accordingly instead of forgetting about it until it's way too late. It's really important to remember that we need to set deadlines for decisions, not just the completion of certain stages of a project. If you can do this, your project will run like clockwork. Number 6, embracing a learning mindset. Every project is a lesson. Embrace it. all of the projects you work on had something to teach you. I used to feel like I needed to know everything before I got started, but that only held me back. My growth mindset philosophy is to treat every build as an opportunity to learn and grow. This is how I like to go about it. Firstly, I admit if there's something I don't know so that the team around me can help me find a solution. Next, I ask questions without fear. It's always better to ask than not know and find yourself in a pickle later on. And lastly, I reflect on each project so that I can identify the lessons learned. You might think asking questions shows weakness, but it's a secret to saving time and money and fuels your learning along the way. Embrace learning. Every mistake is a stepping stone to getting better. Number 7, communicate transparency with clients and suppliers. Clear communication is your secret weapon. I always wish I'd spoken up sooner. Early on in my career, miscommunication nearly cost me a massive activation with the client. I thought everybody knew the plan, but they didn't. I found out it was so important to set clear expectations so that everybody knew what was going on. And these days, this is how I go about it. I document every decision in a shared plan, regular check-ins with clients and suppliers to make sure everything's on track, and establish one clear point of contact for quick resolutions. You might fear that too many meetings can slow you down, but these can prevent massive issues later on if people aren't aligned to the same goals. Relying on email leads to missed messages and miscommunication. I always want to have a real conversation. I know that if I can keep everyone on the same page, the project's going to run seamlessly. Number 8, planning for installation and pack down logistics. The build isn't done until it's installed. We've got to get this right. Too many people get to the bump in or the bump out and wish they had scoped out the logistics requirements way earlier. A few years ago, I was at a big installation and I saw a truck parked at the front of the building with a whole bunch of people standing around it with their hands in their pockets. Problem they had was that the items that they brought to site couldn't fit through the door. And this is something that I hope never happens to us. And this is why I created my logistics mapping method to make sure we've got all these details covered before we arrive on site. Here's how it works. Firstly, I verify all the venue dimensions and the access routes. This then lets me break down all of our custom build elements into transport-friendly pieces. And from there, I can create a detailed schedule for all of our load-in and load-out times. Some people let logistics be an afterthought, but it's the backbone of every build. Overlooking constructional constraints can lead to delays, huge amounts of stress, and the risk that your project doesn't actually ever go live. Plan logistics meticulously and you'll save a heap of time, money, and headaches. And number 9, account for hidden costs early. Hidden costs can blow your budget. You've got to know them up front. I learned this the hard way when unexpected fees double the invoice from one of our suppliers. Hidden costs can derail any pop-up activation or experiential event. To avoid this, I use my complete cost check, an upfront audit of all potential expenses. Firstly, I request a cost breakdown from my suppliers. Then I add on a little contingency just in case we need a little bit more wiggle room. And lastly, I take this cost breakdown and I sit down with my supplier and talk through it line item by line item so that I understand exactly what it includes and exactly what it doesn't include. The way I like to do this is go through each line item and describe it the way I understand it, and then say to the supplier, did anything I say spark anything that you think isn't included in that line item? And that's the best way to keep you safe. Some people might think going into this much detail is way over the top, but this can save you a lot of nasty surprises later on. Assuming that everything's included when it isn't sets us up for some really hard conversations later, and an upfront cost check is going to prevent all of that. Number 10, prioritize must-haves and nice-to-haves. I wish I'd learned to prioritize my time sooner, to focus on what truly matters and cut the fluff. Early in my career, I used to try and do everything for everyone, but the results of that were as I was doing all this work that wasn't really going to benefit anyone in the long run. So now I use my priority playbook to categorize all the must-haves and nice-to-haves for all of our projects. I start by listing down all of the design elements in the job. Then I work with the client to understand the non-negotiables for the campaign's success. Once this is done, I can work with the client to allocate their budget to the areas in the design that matter most and work out what things we're going to bolt onto that afterwards. By prioritizing ruthlessly, you can save yourself a heap of time and make sure that your design is both impactful and cost-effective. Number 11, prepare a contingency plan. Expect the unexpected and then plan for it. Sometimes, no matter how well you plan, things go off script. And this is when you need to think on your feet. My contingency blueprint means always having a plan for critical components. The first thing I like to do is identify potential risks nice and early, and then I can set aside a little extra time and budget to deal with those things. We can develop solutions and plan accordingly. You might think that's a little bit of extra work, but it saves catastrophic delays later on. Failing to plan for contingencies results in reactive, expensive proactive fixes. Prepare for the unexpected and you'll navigate those challenges with confidence. Number 12, understand the venue requirements thoroughly. Know the venue's rules and don't get caught off guard. If you assume everything about the venue is standard, you're probably going to end up doing some last-minute redesigns. Not knowing the venue inside out can be an absolute project killer. This is why I use my site recon checklist. This involves asking for detailed venue specs and restrictions from the start. To kick things off, the first thing I like to do is request all of the venue access requirements. Then I schedule a site visit and I go and check it out myself. Then I confirm loading access, power, and safety protocols. And some people can get caught out when they think, yeah, I've used this venue before, it's all good. If there's one tip I can give you, it's sometimes things and details within venues change, so it's always best to double check this stuff. Understand your venue inside out. This foresight will keep your project on track. Number 13, leverage expert advice and data. I wish I'd sought an expert sooner. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, I could have learned from the pros. But I quickly learned that leaning on the experience and advice from other people was going to be a massive help to me. And here's how I've gone about it in the past. Firstly, I find and consult with the experts in that field. I then seek to understand the data or examples on how these experts have done this in the past. And then that allows me to incorporate those practices into my strategies for my custom build projects. So many people think that custom projects are completely unique. And in many ways they are. But one thing to remember is that actually the fundamentals to each project remain the same. Not seeking or ignoring expert advice leads to avoidable mistakes and inefficiencies. Use the wisdom of the people that have been there. They'll save you time, money, and a heap of headaches. Number 14, test materials and designs early. Test before you invest and avoid costly surprises later. Years ago, I installed a job using a key material that I wasn't familiar with, only to find out that it didn't cope well in the sun. Lesson learned. Now when I'm prototyping or testing something for a custom build, I test it under the conditions that it's going to experience at the pop-in brand activation or experiential event. So here's how I go about testing a new material. Firstly, I order in small batches so that we don't waste too much of the budget. Then I run a test under the right conditions, sometimes even with a few alternative materials, so that I can see the difference in appearance and durability. And lastly, I can use these findings to inform better decisions for the design and tweak everything accordingly. You might think that this is going to slow down the process a little bit, but it's going to save you massive reworks later on if you get this wrong. Skipping tests could lead to unanticipated issues at the install, and nobody wants that. Test early, test often. This simple step is going to make sure that your build always lives up to expectation. And number 15, document everything to prevent misunderstandings. Please, please, please write it down. Documentation is key. Verbal agreements can lead to endless he said, she said moments and costly reworks, and no one can agree what was actually discussed. So here's my number one tip to avoid this issue. The first thing I like to do is create a live shared document with all of the project details. The great thing about this document is that we're able to use this for all major decisions and sign-offs. And the bonus prize to this is that it creates a history of what's happened and the decisions that were made throughout the project, so that everybody's got something to refer back to if they need to. You might think it's a little bit tedious, but clarity is going to save you so much time and money later on. Relying on verbal agreements is only going to cause miscommunication and project delays. Document everything. This simple habit is going to save you from costly misunderstandings and keep your project on track. So there you have it. 15 lessons I've learned over my 15 plus years of doing pop-ups, brand activations and events. Some of these I've learned by observing others, and some of these, unfortunately, I've had to learn the hard way. Hopefully you've been able to pick up a few tips from my learnings so that you don't have to learn the hard way as well. If you can be aware of some of this stuff, it's going to save you so many headaches later on. Hopefully you found this useful. Keep the awesome ideas coming, and I'll catch you in the next one.